Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas with Joe and Mark Kerr, talking about Becky Kerr and what we can do to help get justice for her. Nothing can bring her back, and I'm sure Melissa has felt this every single day of her life. But before we left for the break, we were talking about the trial. Mark, you were at the trial. What can you tell us about it?
Well, I was at the trial, and I thought that they would convict him because of the witnesses, and everyone knew he was guilty. And I heard through the prosecutor initially he was going to try to do a insanity plea, but he didn't. As the trial proceeded, he was saying that part of the reason that he did what he did was because he had supported my sister the whole time they were together. And I remember my sister writing checks to the drive-through and writing checks for utilities and writing checks for every other bill that was due in the household. He had broken his arm or wrist or something, and he had worked at Republic, so he wasn't working the last few months, and I think he was drinking a lot and doing a lot of other things. And so I brought in a lockbox that she had all the canceled checks, and that kind of shut down that part of why he did it.
Well, if he did not go for the insanity plea, and he was convicted of, this was premeditated, this wasn't just an act of rage, and throw in kidnapping, why is he ever up for parole? He was given a life sentence, correct?
Yes, this was about 6 months before they packed on the 5 years for a gun charge. So when they gave you life for aggravated murder, you had to do half of what they considered life, which was 15 years. And then he had to do half of the 7 years that they convicted him on abduction. So he only had to do 18 and a half years to be eligible for parole. And every time he came up, we would do a letter writing campaign, and they would turn down the parole. But 5 years ago, they had a full board hearing, and what that means is if someone doesn't show up to speak for the victim, they'll release him. So one of the women who started the domestic violence shelter, Helen Sirius, and I went down, and there were 17 people on the parole board, and his family was there, and they argued for him to get out, and then we argued for him to stay in. And normally, it takes about 20 minutes to a half hour for them to deliberate. It took them 10 minutes. They voted 17-0 to keep him in. So that's our goal, to keep him in, because he gave my sister and her daughter, Melissa, a life sentence, a death to my sister, and a horrible life for quite a while for Melissa because of the trauma. So I think he needs to stay in prison and serve out his life sentence.
Some people, and we know, and we always pray that there is some kind of a change that can take place in a person. It doesn't mean there are still consequences for our actions. It doesn't mean you don't still have the consequences. A person can have a changed life and do good in prison. Prisons need people to be doing good in there. Your thoughts on that statement? Am I out of my mind there, or what do you think?
I think some people can be maybe rehabilitated.
Has he shown any remorse?
Well, there, in my opinion, there was no remorse. In fact, when he left the courtroom, he looked, after they had sentenced him, he looked at my brother Mark as he was going out and started to laugh. And they had to hold Mark back. Mark was running to take off after him. But my thought was, he told my brother, he's thinking in his head while he's laughing, I told you, if you told your sister to leave you, that I'd kill her. And I did.
You had a comparison to another very prominent prisoner. What did you want to share?
Yeah, I read an article in it about Charlie Manson, and it said that he's now a model prisoner. And it said wreaking havoc behind bars is apparently a young man's game. And the prison officials believe that, the things he's doing, they called it goody shoot, 2 shoes straight. It's because of his old age and his health issues. But he's still a ticking time bomb, just like Lincoln is. And
he's how old now?
Charlie Manson's 82, and he's about 6 years older than Lincoln Mayberry.
So you're thinking perhaps this model prisoner behavior has to do with the fact that he's getting old and would rather not die in prison.
Well, he's saying all the right things and doing all the right things, but living in an institution versus living outside in the real world are two different things. It's kind of like a lion at the zoo. You know, a lion's not going to hurt you when he's in his cage, but if you let him out of his cage, you know, he's going to hurt somebody.
That's an interesting analogy. How did you get in touch with the block parole people?
Well, I was on Facebook looking for places to put our petition that we originally had, and I ended up sending him a message on Facebook. He got back to me within 5 minutes. Other places took days to get back to me. And we started texting back and forth, and I told him, it was for Lincoln Mabry, and he told me he knew exactly who he was. And he says, I can help you. He said, I don't have time to help every single person that calls me and contacts me, but he said, I help with the worst of the worst, and this guy qualifies. He told me he's a monster, is what he told me.
You've started a petition? Or tell me about your efforts. What all are you doing?
Well, first we did a paper petition, and the day after we met with Victim Services, which was October 11th, I went to Walmart and I stood outside for a couple hours, and everyone that I handed the petition to signed, but the real interesting thing is the first lady that I handed it to read the petition, and she looked at me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I have a sister named Becky Kerr." And
that's chilling.
I told my brother Mark, and the first thing he said is, that was a sign from God up above that we're doing the right thing to keep this guy in so that no one else is ever hurt.
Yes. So tell me about your efforts now and why you're here today. What can we do to help you?
Well, people can go to blockparole.com. You can either go on a web search or you can go on his Facebook page. And all you have to do is go to petitions and click on Becky Kerr. And he's got a story about Becky, what she was like, what happened, why, Lincoln Mabry shouldn't be released. And at the bottom is a form you can fill out with your name, address, and email. And when you hit send, it goes directly to the parole board. And we're hoping that people hear this and that they'll help support our family, especially Melissa. My brother and I and Melissa, we were on the front page of the Repository, the Independent. We were on Fox 8 News, like 6 different newscasts on the 1st or the 30th of October, excuse me. And I'm sure that Lincoln Mabry knows what we're doing to keep him in jail. And I'm sure family members told him, and my brother and I are more worried for Melissa and her family than anything, just fear of retribution if he gets out.
Oh. You mentioned how many times you've had to tell this story again. What does that do to a person? I think there's been the crime, and then families try to move on, but parole comes up about every, 20 years or so, every 5 years?
After he's done his minimum, it's every 5 years.
So you've had to go through this again. Every 5 years you have to relive it?
Yes, up until 5 years ago when they had a full board hearing, which if we hadn't shown up for that, they would have released him. We did a letter writing campaign, but once they have the full board hearing, you have to show up and argue for Becky and Melissa.
How do you function going through this and having to talk about it time and time again?
It's hard. It brings up memories that you really don't want to experience, but we do it for Becky's memory and ultimately for Melissa, because in the past, every time he came up for parole, Melissa, I talked to her, and she was afraid if he got out, he would kill her, which I told her, you don't have to worry about that because he's not going to do that. If he was going to look for anybody, he'd look for me.
Tell me a little bit about her life. When speaking about her, we still think of her as a very frightened little 8-year-old girl going through the unthinkable. How has her life gone the past 37 years? Where is she today, and how's she doing?
She's doing a lot better today, but initially she lived with my mother for a number of years, and my mother worked full-time, and she needed someone to be with her full-time, so she ended up living with my brother Joe and his wife, my sister Patty and her husband, my sister Claudia and her husband. She never had a desire to live with me because I'm pretty strict. And then she went into foster care briefly, and when she was a freshman at Aquinas, she ran into Stephanie Schaefer, who is an anchor for Channel 8, and the Schaefers ended up raising her all through high school. Wow. She lived with the family. They're an awesome family, and it's been real hard on her, though.
So she somehow was able to get through teenage years. And so I take it, Joe, you weren't quite as strict as your brother would have been. That's why.
Yeah. Mark's the strict one.
You're the
just
strict
like
one.
he was back when my mom was raising us.
Okay, with an iron fist. So how nice, how wonderful to meet such an amazing family as well. And I've got to say, you know, the Kerrs are also an amazing family. She really went from one good home to another good home and has had a good, strong upbringing since those times. Now she's 46 years old,
I think
roughly.
45. I think.
45. What's her life like today?
Well, she's got custody of 3 of her grandkids, and so she's raising them. And because of that, she had to go through some counseling, and she had blocked out the murder up until the last few years, and then things started coming back. She joined us when Channel 8 interviewed us, and she was the primary person they spoke to, obviously. And she talked to the reporters for the repository. I think that helped her, but I think it also, at this point, overwhelmed her. That's why she isn't here with us today. Doing the interview.
Very difficult to have to relive that over and over. It's very brave of you all, and I can't thank you enough again for being here, and really hope it helps. Tell us again the website to go to where people, if they would like to help and sign the petition, what we'll find there and how to do it.
They can either Google blockparole.com or they can go to Facebook and type it in. And once they type it in, all they have to do is go to petitions, and Becky will be right, the first one, I believe, and they click on Becky Kerr. They can read her story, and then they can just fill the information out and hit send, and that will go directly to the parole board.
Okay, blockparole.com. Do a search on Becky Kerr, and it's Kerr, and it's pretty user-friendly. It walks you through it.
As soon as you open it up, you hit petitions, and then Becky will be right there. And we've got 1 week from today for the hearing.
Well, and now this is airing Friday, so the hearing is this coming Monday, yes?
Yes.
So we need to do this over the weekend. We need to do this prior to Monday.
That's correct.
All right, well, we will get on it, and thank you so much, Joe, Mark, Kerr. God bless you. God bless your family, and thank you so much for being here and for what you're doing for our community.
Thank you.